Yes. Yes. Welcome back in.
Look at that handsome guy.
Off the bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Now we welcome on a very special guest. Maybe the most special guest we've ever had in the history of this program. And he's been on multiple times. But he's, right now, the most special guest of all time. Rick Borering, the Musketeer Report, one half of the best radio team in this city, or I guess around, is NKU this city? I call NKU Cincinnati. One half of that as well. My good friend Jim Kelch as well. Rick Borering, how the heck are you? But also, Rick Borering, noted Android user. I wrote that down as well. Rick, how are you, buddy?
Google Pixel user.
Google Pixel, huh?
Yeah, you scum iPhone users who are just sheep. It's unbelievable. I hear the same thing from all of you. It's a superior phone, Elliot. Learn technology for once.
Yeah, is this the one that folds? You can fold it all kinds of ways, and you get to do all kinds of like cool little tricks with it?
It's a Google Pixel. It's a flagship phone. What do you not know about Google Pixel? Like Google, you know the thing you type all your searches into? Google, they own YouTube. Pretty big company, Elliot.
I think it does fold. I heard it could also be an accordion.
Like you can
play like an accordion.
You can use it as a coaster too. It's a multifaceted device. Look at that. Wow. If there was a face for Google Pixel, you would be it. Because I've never heard of a Google Pixel until you texted me. But I'm honored to be with you right now. So, Rick Borering, again, we're going to talk both of your expertises here. A little Xavier, a little NKU. I'm going to start with the game last night, Rick. Xavier wins 91-82 on the road against Providence.
Can I ask you, why do you bring Paul Fritchner on when the team's playing well and bring me on when they're struggling? Why is that?
What do you mean? They just won a game. What do you want me to do? They won the game.
They just had their entire season blown apart in the loss to Villanova, and then they almost blew a 26-point lead to Providence. I'm just curious. I'm asking you.
Rick,
you said I was the most
Rick, you're spoiling the whole interview. Like half of these questions are me asking if you have hope. You just spoiled the entire. I'm still going to ask them.
No,
you're not going to stop me from asking.
They're a bad team. They're a
bad team. All right. Well, can I finish my question, please?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Please, I mean, come on. It's a Google Pixel guy. As of now, Xavier sits on the bubble. Would you say you're? I literally wrote this question out, and now it's worthless. Would you say you're confident enough with the way X is playing at this very second for them to win out? If you're not, what will it take?
Here comes some nuance.
Ellie, I don't want to act like I am a professional at your gig here, but maybe go with the flow. Maybe don't pre-plan the questions that extremely to where you have to stick to the script. Maybe just move on with the interview.
Well, all right. Well, what else am I going to talk about? See, now I'm going to have to throw it to Reed because I have other questions, and we had a whole plan, and you ruined it all.
I can carry it with you. We can do this. You are a good conversationalist. You don't have to stick to that bad scripted question after I already answered it.
Bad scripted question? Let me ask you. Okay, can I reframe it? Will you let me reframe it?
Yeah.
If Xavier wins out, assuming they don't lose in the first round of the tournament, Travis Steele style, will they make the tournament?
Well, I wouldn't worry about the Big East tournament in general. Unless they win the Big East tournament, then that'll matter. Otherwise, like 1 or 2 wins in the Big East tournament isn't going to be enough to push them over the edge in terms of an at-large resume. If they win out, then they don't have a very strong resume, but they do put themselves in position where they're probably going to be right along the cut line. Yeah. The bubble is pretty weak this year. If it continues to be weak and you don't have bid stealers in conference tournament time, then maybe if they win out, they can still sneak in with an at-large bid. But the way I've been phrasing it, Elliot, is they no longer control their own destiny. You know, that had they won at Villanova, then you felt like, okay, they can keep winning and maybe even have a little wiggle room, and they could potentially play themselves off that last team in the field line, maybe get out of Dayton even, had they picked up another quad 1 win and continued to play well down the stretch. Now it feels like, one, you're asking this team to win 7 straight games after the Villanova loss, which they haven't done that at any point yet this season, win 7 straight games. And 2, there's still some difficult games there, a couple road games. Obviously, they won at Providence last night, but they also have Creighton coming to the Cintas Center. So it's not going to be an easy road for them. And even if they do complete that, their resume is still going to be like just at the edge, maybe good enough to get in.
When you think about your guy, Sean Miller, and our guy, Wes Miller, our being the University of Cincinnati, obviously, Wes Miller has drawn as much criticism probably as anybody in the history of human in mankind. I don't think anybody has been more criticized
mostly
ever
from you.
than mostly from me. Yeah,
Maybe
sure. I mean,
Judas.
a little bit from me, a little bit, not too much. A little bit from me. He's a dodgeball guy. Sean Miller, in his tenure as the Xavier head coach the past 3 years, yeah, he has a Sweet 16. I mean, you can't take that away from him. But when it comes to his guys, quote unquote, his guys, I would say that there hasn't been like a level of confidence. As we sit here in year 3, are you a little bit shaky, or should Xavier fans be a little bit shaky about Sean Miller as the head basketball coach of Xavier?
I think obviously comparing those two coaches are apples to oranges. You've got one who has a great history of success at the high major level at Xavier and Arizona prior to coming back to Xavier. So comparing what he's done in his previous history compared to Wes Miller, who's never really done anything of consequence, whether it was at UNCG or UC, is probably not a reasonable comparison to make. But as it relates to specifically Xavier's situation, I think with Sean Miller, he's proven he can coach. There's no doubt about that. The question is, with the way the landscape has changed in college basketball, when you have to do the transfer portal every single year, you have NIL to figure out, and you're in a situation with college basketball conferences where they've changed a lot. The Big East is still a high major conference, but it's obviously the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC have been bumped up another notch or two. It's an interesting time in college basketball to try to figure out how to put a roster together, especially if you're working with fewer resources than your peers have. And I think that's the situation that Sean Miller and the Xavier staff finds themselves in. Yeah, if I was a Xavier fan, I would have questions and concerns about how they're going to put the roster together going forward, especially coming off this year, because this team wasn't good enough. And I'm not sure how much of it you're really bringing back for next year. Like there's not a ton to build off of from this year's group going into next year. So it really does feel for a lot of these programs, and maybe everyone at this point, every season is year to year. You don't build off of the previous year like you used to. So you've really got to be shrewd when it comes to putting together your roster.
Hey, Rick, how's it? You know what? It's good to see a handsome face on here. I will tell you this. Every time that we bring Paul on here, I say, don't bring on Paul, bring on Rick. And Elliot's like, no.
That's not true.
Rick doesn't know what he's talking about.
So I know Rick's busier than Paul. I know Rick's busier than Paul.
I totally got that vibe. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, it's
just not true.
By the way, you still? I'm sorry I haven't been in the Twitter Spaces. You still doing that nightly? Because I used to do little bits in there, and I probably annoyed the heck out of you. I think every time you're like, "All right, Reed, what bit do you got tonight?" And I'd come in and I'd do my little joke, and then I'd leave.
Yeah, that was always good. We don't do them nightly. I think Fritzner does most of those, so he would probably take you on now if you wanted to join his spaces. But we do them occasionally. We'd love to have you back.
Well, that's why I don't get on, because it's Paul. I'm a Rick Borering guy through and through. I just
Thank you.
All right, so one of the reoccurring themes this season is that the Muskies can't close out games. I mean, we saw that against St. John's. We saw that even last night when they have a huge lead and it gets a little dicey, and you're just sitting here watching going, is this going to happen again? Obviously, it didn't. I just wanted to know what your take is on why you think that Xavier is really struggling on closing out games really throughout the entire conference play.
I think that's probably the most frustrating part of this season for Xavier fans, because, Reed, when we heard about how they were putting this roster together, it was like, hey, last year we tried to bring in some young, fresh talent, some overseas guys, international. It did not work because of the experience level with the transfer portal. Everyone else is bringing in 4th, 5th year guys, 23, 24, 25-year-olds, and we were trying to do it with 18, 19-year-olds that were international students that were trying to adjust and all this stuff. It just doesn't work. So we're going to get older. We're going to get more experience. In fact, we've got the second most experienced roster in the country, according to KenPom. And yet this team now doesn't show any maturity, poise, composure in late game situations. That's hard to swallow from a fan base's perspective. And when you ask about like what's causing that, and it's tough to say. I would say weak leadership more than anything, and not like from a coaching standpoint, but just on the floor in those moments. I think you have to have really good point guard play in those moments. You have to have guys that step up, want the ball, and aren't shying away from those moments. And I don't know that Xavier really has that right now. Honestly, like it doesn't seem like they have a great go-to best player option when games are on the line. Like Ryan Conwell is their best scorer, but he can't really create for himself very well, and it doesn't seem like he's loved that moment. So I think I would put it mostly on that, just the lack of leadership and go-to options when the game is on the line.
You know, it's funny that you bring that because, you know, Zach Freemantle, Ryan Conwell, those are the two pieces that we've talked about. And you do need that leadership to be around. Do you think part of the reason is the fact that Conwell hasn't been around this program a whole lot? Like, because this is his first year. Do you think it is kind of, and Zach has, but I think we all know that Zach hasn't always been labeled as the best, the more forefront leader when it comes to the Muskies. Do you think it's just kind of program awareness? Like, do you think it's just being around the program? Do you think that's why Ryan hasn't stepped up in that situation?
Yeah. I think that's a big part of what everyone's dealing with in the transfer portal era, right? Like, there are certain guys who are naturally just that way, and regardless of where they're at, they're going to shine through in those moments. But I think other guys, and Ryan Conwell may be in this boat. Maybe if he was more confident or he had been more used to that role. But even going back to Indiana State, he wasn't the best player on Indiana State's team last year. That was Robbie Avila, their big center, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Right. So I don't think that there's necessarily a defined reason for it with Ryan Conwell, but that's what I think that's definitely a part of it. I think the lack of continuity with your teammates, and also just the fact that, I don't mean this from like a negative perspective, like these are bad guys who don't care about each other at all, but I do think when you're bringing in all these mercenaries, for lack of a better term, who are just there for 1 year, and even if they have more years of eligibility left, they might be considering, okay, what am I going to do when this year is over and get in the transfer portal again? I think the sport's changed a little bit in that way, to where there probably is a little bit less togetherness and overall mental toughness from teams.
Yeah, it's certainly tough to build kind of team chemistry when guys are coming in and out the door. Might I suggest a game of dodgeball? It seemed to work for a lot of teams in the area. Maybe a little game of dodgeball, and you turn this whole thing around. All right, one guy I want to ask you about is Dante Maddox. We were kind of waiting. We always kind of knew that he had this ability to kind of explode, and we were waiting on it. Last two games, scoring 24 and 26. How important is he towards the rest of the season? What is left to salvage of this season? How important is Dante Maddox?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, if you're going to make any run here, it feels like you need his offense the way it's been going. And I've said this on my write-up, and I just said it on the Skinny podcast I did with Richard Skinner at Local 12, that I feel like with Dante Maddox and this Xavier team, the way they played at Providence, that was kind of the type of performance and team that I've expected throughout the entire season. I know fans didn't like the way that it ended. They were up by 26. They only win by 9. The defense stunk over the final 10 minutes as they gave up 32 points. But when they put this roster together, we were joking in the offseason on Twitter Spaces. I was saying things like, if you want to beat this Xavier team, you're going to need to score 100 points. And if Xavier wants to win games, they're going to need to score 100 points, because that, like, Jack Freemantle at the center spot alongside 4 guards doesn't sound like the most tough, physical, defensive-minded team, but I do expect them to be able to score a lot of points with these 3-point shooters that are all over 40% that they're bringing in, and that just never really materialized throughout the season. They never were that high-flying offense that scored over 90 points easily. And then we get to last night at Providence, where Ryan Conwell had kind of an off night. Marcus Foster shot the ball terribly, didn't play well. It was kind of a ho-hum game for Xavier, and yet they win and had a 26-point lead at one point in the second half because they scored 91 points. And I think that the shooting ability of Dante Maddox, Zach Freemantle obviously scored well in that game. It showed you that kind of the vision that maybe they had for this team when they put it together back in the summer of, like, if you have enough options that even if you're not at your best, you can still play fast and force teams to score over 90 points, you're going to be hard to beat. And I just don't think they were that team long enough this year. Maybe we're finally getting to that point late here, but it just never came to fruition soon enough.
Before I send it back to Elliot, I was supposed to ask, are you the most famous Holy Cross alum in the history of that school? Because they said that you're in the pantheon, you're in the Mount Olympus of Holy Cross alum. I didn't know if anyone else came to mind.
I'm terrified to think about who might have told you to ask that or even knew that I was from Holy Cross.
I got places everywhere.
That's the scary thing. I didn't know Hamilton touched Latonia. I didn't know we were neighbors in that regard. I can't imagine I am. There's got to be somebody bigger from Holy Cross, although I'm not sure who Holy Cross's famous alumni are at this point.
It's Rick Borering, and Hamilton, much like the Catholic Church, touches everywhere. Elliot, we'll send it on over to you.
Oh, come on. Ruined the whole interview.
Catholic school. I'm used to it.
I bet Reed has never asked Skinny anything. I'm the only one in this studio who's asked Skinny anything. I should at least get credit for that. Yeah, I should. Thank you. I would like at least some sort of medal or something for being the only person who's done that in this studio. But nonetheless, I'll continue on with a Xavier question, even though you don't like my Xavier question. So I'm gonna answer it anyway. This team's identity seems to be pretty much Zach Freemantle, and that's fair when you have your obvious best player is a big man like him, and he's able to score as much as he is, rebound as much as he does. Next year, the identity for the Musketeers, you mentioned that you've lost, or you're going to lose, probably a sizable portion of this roster. You don't know what it's going to look like. Going forward, what's the identity? What should the identity of Xavier be?
Yeah, I'm really not trying to give you a hard time. I would probably argue that this year's identity is the 3-point shooting, though, right? Like, I mean, the way to beat this year's Xavier team is don't let them swing the ball around the perimeter. Don't let Ryan Conwell go off from 3-point range and Marcus Foster. And I guess you can include Dante Maddox in that mix now. But that's really been their biggest issue. Like, yeah, Zach Freemantle's been their most consistent scorer, but I think most teams feel like, let Zach Freemantle get his inside. We can deal with that. Don't let their shooters go off from the perimeter and we'll be fine. And to your point, I mean, what's their identity going forward? Who knows? I mean, like, if Ryan Conwell does have another year of eligibility, so if he comes back next year, and that's a tough decision they're going to have to make coming up here in the transfer portal, like, what is he worth? How much is his raise going to be if there is one? Can you afford to pay that? Is he good enough to be a go-to player for you again next year? Is that how you want to proceed? Maybe. I have no idea. But, I mean, maybe Ryan Conwell comes back and you're kind of making your identity again a skilled three-point shooting team. But I would argue you need at least another go-to scorer to go alongside Ryan Conwell. I think we've seen this year that while he is a good Big East player and a big-time three-point shooter, I don't think he can be your best scorer or your go-to guy, especially in those late game situations where you need something to be created on the offensive end. I think he's more of a spot-up shooter. So there's going to be a lot of tough decisions that need to be made this offseason. And when it comes to identity, Elliot, I think that's hard to figure out until you really get into the portal and start building your team.
In 20 years at Xavier, I think Freemantle has like 19 crosstown shootout wins. In the pantheon of great Xavier players since the year 2000, where would you put Freemantle? Where would you rank him?
No offense to Zach, but not very high. I mean, he just hasn't won much, right? Like, I don't know that he's contributed to a lot of winning, and that would be my probably my biggest mark against him. Now, he's a great scorer. He's rebounded pretty well on the defensive end, but overall defensively, he's not been very good. He's had a tumultuous career at Xavier, obviously, has had some run-ins with the coaches, and it's been an up and down road for him with all the injuries. It's been good to get him to finish off this season healthy. It seemed like after the UC game there, he was going to miss the rest of the season potentially with that knee injury. So it was great that he at least got to be on the court and finish off a career because he is a competitor. He loves basketball. I know it really does mean a lot to him. So I was glad to see him get to finish off his career. But in terms of like all-time Xavier players, I don't think he would rank very highly on that list.
We'll switch it over to NKU just for a second. NKU 6-8 in the conference, 11-14 overall. I'd imagine it's not what most Norse fans wanted this season. But in the Horizon League, obviously, the path to the tournament has always been and will always be going on that run in the conference tournament. Does this team have enough to go on that run this year?
Now, that's a good question right there,
Thank
Elliot.
you.
Listen,
I was 0 for like 9. I got to get one of them on the board there.
Yeah, it's about time. No, NKU... With NKU, it's always about 3 days in March, right? We always talk about that. Yep. That's Darren Horton's tagline, 3 days in March. This year, it's going to be 4 days in March. They're going to have to play that first-round game in the Horizon League tournament, I think. They're not going to get the bye. You'd have to be a top 5 seed to get there. They're sitting around 8th right now, and I don't think they're going to get up into those top 5. So right now for NKU, it's about not falling into the bottom 3, because if you're in the bottom 3 seeds in the conference tournament, then you'd have to play a first-round road game. You want to play a first-round home game, which they should be able to do with where they're currently positioned. And then the big thing is, figuring out if you can play at a high enough level for multiple games in a row that you have a chance to go on a run when you get to the Horizon League tournament. And I think over the last 3 games, we've seen that from them. They won 2 in a row. Then they came home, played a good Robert Morris team. They had a second half lead, ended up losing that game. And I know fans were distraught. It was kind of like the Xavier at Providence game where the defense was just terrible down the stretch and they stopped scoring. Xavier obviously held on to their win. NKU wasn't able to do that. They ended up losing the game at home. And so fans are upset about that. But for me, I saw enough offense in that performance. I saw a team that scored enough that defense is never the issue with Darren Horn coach teams in that matchup zone that they run, especially when you get to conference tournament time. Opposing teams' buttholes start to pucker a little bit, and you play that matchup zone, and the defense is no longer an issue. So for me, with NKU, I'm really watching the offense the rest of the way. I want to see the Norse continue to score the ball the way they have the last 3 games.
Can we say butthole on the radio? Do we know?
We just did.
Oh, we said it
Just
twice.
happened.
FCC is going to come for us now, Rick. Way to go.
No, I'm an FCC veteran. I know all the rules. That's why I signaled it.
NKU takes on Green Bay tomorrow at 7 p.m. Is it necessary to play that game? We'll just call it a forfeit.
Hold on now. You don't want to shortchange Doug Gottlieb a loss here, do you? He's trying to see if he can lose all the games in the Horizon League schedule. Don't make it 19 instead of 20.
You're right. Have you thought about coaching a Division I college basketball program?
I don't think anyone wants that, but I'd love to be a bag man.
I don't think
I'd
you
be
could
a great.
Yeah, that's good.
I'd be a great assistant
like
coach to drop off bags before the NIL era, like make illegal payments.
Sure. I like that. I like that. Now, you couldn't be as bad as Doug Gottlieb, to be fair. I mean, you would have to try very hard to be as bad as that. But my final question, and to be fair, I'm going to credit Reed. I've had a string of bad questions for you today. This was Reed's question. This is Reed.
Doug Gottlieb asks pretty good questions on his radio show, though. I will say that.
Yeah, he does. He's a full-time radio guy, obviously. Yeah. If you had to put money down on one Southwest Ohio team to make the tournament, who would it be?
Miami of Ohio?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. It's a sad world. That's your guy, Travis Steele, leading that program to a tournament, if that were to be the case.
I don't think it's absurd to say.
And a Xavier player on that team.
Well, I don't think it's absurd to say that out of the 4 teams, they have the best odds. Like, they've certainly got a better odds than Dayton.
Clearest path.
And it's just the only problem is they got to beat Akron, who they
Right.
lost to by 30. So yeah,
The issue with saying Miami is that, I mean, there's still a very clear obstacle in their way that I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to defeat. But yeah, I mean, if we're saying who has the best chance out of these teams, I think it's them. I mean, NKU has a better chance of beating the best teams in the Horizon League than Miami does of beating Akron, I think. But I still like Akron. I still like Miami's team a lot better. I think they're playing a lot better to where you probably give them the odds.
Who's the most dead? Is it Dayton?
It's got to be Dayton, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it probably would have been UC before the dodgeball game.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
another bet.
That's right.
All it takes is one game of dodgeball, and you turn around. But a little team chemistry. Might I suggest bowling next week?
I was going to say kickball. We got capture the flag coming on Friday, so we're ready to roll, baby. The Bearcats are all the way back, so I'm not even going to ask you about the Bearcats because you're going to say something disparaging. So I don't need to hear that. But
when have I ever done that? Who do you think I am?
well, I don't know. I just think I come on. Listen,
That's Paul.
Well,
Rick's big time. He doesn't disparage other teams.
Okay, all right, that's good. That's good.
Well, I don't get it. UC fans hate me. I don't hate UC. I don't get into all that stuff.
I don't get into the wars either on Twitter. I don't do that. I'm just saying that usually Xavier Paul comes on here, he makes fun of UC. He laughs at me when I ask UC
Paul
questions.
went to Xavier. I went to NKU. That's what you forget.
Okay, well, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Rick Borering, thank you very much for giving us your time today. And obviously, go follow him. We have the Musketeer Report. He's calling the game tomorrow against Doug Gottlieb's Green Bay. What's their mascot?
The Phoenix.
Are they really?
Yeah, and
They're
just like the
Green
Hell
Bay
yeah.
Phoenix?
and they're gonna rise again.
They're going to – what
From the ashes.
What station are you guys on tomorrow?
ESPN 1530, which, by the way, I will say,
Okay.
you are, to this day, the all-time greatest
Yeah.
producer we ever had on NKU radio broadcasts.
I'm honored. I'm honored. Listen, I didn't play those little WLW promos when I was told not to. I was for you guys. I was with those little bumpers that we come into. It's like Scott Sloan.
Yeah, it comes back with...
I listen to you guys
Jim
on
Kelp
that
does
one.
not like this. He wants
I
those
know
taken
he
out, and
does
you
not.
listen.
I listen.
You would fight back for him, which is appreciated. Now we usually lose that battle because they're spineless producers back there at the station. Elliot.
Yeah, Elmore. It's always been
I'm
Elmore.
just kidding. Shout out to Liam Tomlinson. He's a great guy.
Yeah, Liam. But thank you very much, Rick, for coming on our show today. Have a very pleasant Thursday afternoon. Go Norse.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Google Pixels stink.